So small pools, marginal fields, small in name, large in value. Value to the UK, according to the Oil and Gas Authority, roughly speaking, about 130 odd billion sterling. So small in name, small in volume, 70% or less than 10 million barrels. Big challenge for how we can figure out the technology applications and how we get through the sort of quite a maze-like structure to get them connected into the existing infrastructure. This is a slight rerun of two of the things that we did in support with the Oil and Gas Authority, who we collaborate with a lot over the 30th round. So we held a technical forum last summer, and Neil Duncan, who's in the room from the Oil and Gas Authority, and Carlo contacted me earlier in the week, and they just reminded me they've had something like 96 license applications over 239 license blocks. So that's quite a stimulating sort of piece from our point of view. We can't entirely take credit for that, clearly, but it's great to see that interest in the mature basin as a UKCS. So without further ado, we know about the size of the prize, as it were, as it's sort of colloquial known. We know what we're doing. I think from our point of view, if I just forget this isn't a touch screen and use the pad, we are a technology centre. We use this product all the time to sort of tell the story of marginal fields, what we're about and what we're going to do. So we know 230, 225, 350 sections are on there in terms of fields. We know the value to the UK. The interesting part from our point of view is the application of technology and how we can do that. So I think without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Steve Harrison of Scottish Enterprise, who's going to stand up and drive the slides. I'll just expand it for you. I shall hand you the clicker. You are now in charge.
Thank you. Well, I'm not going to talk about anything to do with energy, so that's a bit interesting. As Chris said, I work for Scottish Enterprise. I'm a project manager there. And to my sins, I was previously involved in the bid team that won the offshore renewable catapult and the bid team that started the City Region deal and the Oil and Gas Technology Centre, so I'm guilty of a number of sins. Today I'm going to talk about some bold thoughts, if this works. Some of you may have seen this. We did an article back in the end of December, Facing the Future, really about what we call Subsea 2030. And that's what I'm going to talk about just for 5 minutes or so, and ask, have any of you actually read the article? That's my first piece. Put your hand up if you actually read the article. 4, 5 people. That tells me that traditional press isn't the way forward. Thank you very much for that. Subsea 2030, it's a programme of activity designed to get some stimulus and some thinking beyond the current opportunities. So the rest of the day is probably going to be about those current opportunities. On Wednesday at the breakfast meeting, some of you will have been there, that was also about some of those current opportunities. This is broader than that. So I'm going to tell you about the activity we've done, and I'm going to see if I can get you involved as well. So do anybody tweet? Does anybody use Twitter? Nobody. Tells me social media. Oh, social media is not quite as dead as I think. So hashtag Subsea 2030. If you want to use it, that's the hashtag that we're using. So feel free to use that. So we'll move on. We've done an internal SE workshop. So the idea of Subsea 2030 is to be out there thinking and then to come back to where we are today and say, what do we need to do to get to those future points? And we've done a workshop internally in SE where we generated 12 very broad and bold ideas. And of those, 4 have already started the progress towards being moved forward. And we've currently got 4 cohorts of 5 people with a mix of academia, industry, public sector, entrepreneur, and sort of general other people interested in the sector, starting to look and explore some of these bolder challenges. And there's 20 ideas at various stages of development. Why Subsea 2030? Well, it's that point about saying, I'm going to put yourself in the future and assume it's real. So these challenges, you'll think they're preposterous, you'll think they're stupid, right? And that's part of it. Because the idea is to assume that it's real and then to say what else could be done. What do we need to do to take advantage of it? Where do we need to invest? So the first one, does anybody know what it actually is? So, yeah, what's it? It's a nugget. It's a nodule, yeah? That's the future. That's the gold industry of the seabed. Right? That's what when people say about the polymetallic nodule, you'll now know what one looks like. Deep sea mining is the approach of trying to capture all of these things. And it's obviously a new industry that's being generated. There's lots of different ways in which that could be found. One of the big challenges we say is by 2030, we will efficiently and safely extract precious metal from the seabed. I'm not going to ask you who believes that could be possible. Instead, I'm going to ask you about these two ideas that we've developed. One is, imagine if Aberdeen has built on its offshore and its subsea capability, the ability to actually lead on that, the ability to actually be able to have zero negative impact on the seabed in extracting and processing those very precious minerals. If I put that into context, people are spending billions today. Some of you have seen the Elon Musk launch. That's about harvesting asteroids in the future. That's his big next step of his plan. That's to get those same minerals that exist at the bottom of the seabed. Right? So the establishment of a seabed mineral collection and processing supply chain or development group. If we set that up, who would be interested? Who would want to take part in that? A few people? Email subsea2030@scotent.co.uk. Tell us that you're interested and we'll get in touch. Even bolder, even wilder. Alternative protein. By 2030, 30% of the world's food, protein, fruit and veg, will be produced offshore. And why not at the seabed? Again, stupidly bold statement. Who would believe it? But Bill Gates, Richard Branson and Cargill Foods have just invested multi-millions in a company called Memphis Meats, which is all about producing these alternative meat proteins. It's not corn, as in it tastes like meat, but it's a meat substitute. It is meat, it's just animal-free. Imagine that. Cruelty-free meat. It's pork, but not as we know it. That's pork. And it would taste just like pork. And it would cook just like pork. But no animal has been involved in its production. And it's produced in massive labs, and it needs energy, and it needs stability. And one of the challenges they have with that is where to get the constant temperature from that these labs need to work from. So why not do it on the seabed? Aberdeen builds on its food nutrition and its subsea and its seabed experience. The development of producing meat substitute offshore seabed established a programme, a development and test facility. To do that, we think we've got to go a little bit more reality. Is it even economically feasible? Right? At the moment, this is meat that's grown in a petri dish in a lab somewhere that people are now thinking can be grown in a factory. We want to take that one step further and grow it in an autonomous facility down on the seabed. Is it possible? Who thinks it's too far in the future to even think about? Who actually thinks, yes, maybe? Email subsea2030@scotent.co.uk. Let us know that you're interested and we'll set up the group. So the third one. By 2030, 10% of the world's population will be living on the seabed. The pressure for land and for that land to be used for people to live on. Right? Already there are communities in America starting to think about living down in the ocean. Right? All sorts of good reasons. They get tech and all sorts of other stuff. And this is a project with two very large and well-established Japanese companies looking at creating the next generation of hotel and integrated living accommodation as an ocean-to-seabed experience. It has integrated food, integrated energy, integrated living and work. So imagine if we investigate the practicality of developing seabed communities at scale, build on our expertise of offshore construction and seabed engineering, so subsea engineering. And to do that, we think we need to also understand surface to seabed transportation solutions. Somebody's mentioned Hyperloop of the seabed. And we need to establish a cross-sector working group to develop a roadmap for this future. Again, anybody interested? You know where you need to go. So those are some of the wilder and more broader and less energy-related ideas. We're also exploring Internet of the Ocean. All vehicles, devices, machines, and even maybe creatures are all connected together. And the one that obviously is probably the most interesting you're going to hear more about today, the North Sea has a zero carbon footprint, produces all the energy for the UK and Northern Europe, and you'll get more about that as we go. Those are the 2030 pieces. We've also been talking about the challenges that the industry faces, so if I just test those. Strengthening the subsea entrepreneur's journey from pre-start through to scale. Who's actually been on that journey? Who's actually a subsea entrepreneur or a technology founder? And don't embarrass yourself or embarrass me by telling us that the support system isn't there for you, but if we was to strengthen the support system, would that be useful? Yeah, so that's something we're going to focus on. And we want to encourage bright minds and younger folk to explore what we're starting to call the blue economy. You know, lots of people are focusing on the tech sector. We see this as tech sector but wet, right? Everything that's going on in the tech sector, whether that's drones, AI, blockchain, it's equally applicable. to the subsea and the seabed and the ocean. So in summary, lots of opportunity. We're seeking more participants. If you want to be involved in the idea relays, you know where to do. Subsea 2030 at scottent.co.uk. And if you're interested, take your phone out, post us a tweet for the future. Hashtag Subsea 2030. Get involved. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Steve. This is kind of a little bit quick fire on the strategic part here, and I apologise slightly for that, but we have a lot of good content to get through for the day. So now I'd like to hear from Vary. Vary's going to present from Wood Mackenzie the commercial view, the challenges ahead. Not small, these challenges, but the prize is, again, quite significant. Thank you, Vary.
Okay, thanks, Chris.
Clickers on one side.
Good stuff. Yeah. So, can everyone hear me okay? It's hard to tell up here. Yeah, okay, a few nods, great. So, good morning everyone, really pleased to be here today from Wood Mac. My name is Vary Evans, and I guess my job here today is to broaden it out, to have a look at the whole context of small pools and marginal fields from the UKCS perspective. And a lot of what I'll present today is based on a study that we did at the end of last year in Wood Mackenzie, and we did it on small pools because it's been something ever since I joined Wood Mac. It's been something that's been talked about, but it felt like at the end of last year there was a few things coming together that made it a bit more important in the discussion. The 30th round was coming up, the corporate landscape of the North Sea was changing and is still changing. Folks are looking at projects in a different way, so short cycle, quicker payback projects are, a bit more in fashion now. And yeah, of course, the work that the OGTC was doing was very important in that picture too. So we're presenting a few of the conclusions here of that study. But before I start, I thought it'd be interesting just to set the scene with a couple of different ways of looking at the imperative of small pools in the UKCS context. So the chart on the left shows our view of where UKCS investment in the green line is going. Now, what we know from history is that investment out in the future, 5-10 years in advance, is very, very difficult to forecast. Of course, that's more true today as folks are more cautious and planning months ahead, not years ahead. But we would fully expect that development spend to keep on pushing to the right. But I think what is abundantly clear is that decommissioning spend is higher this year than it ever has been before, and we expect it to be around about $2 billion, £2 billion pounds actually, a year for the next few years, and ramping up after that. And if things go as we expect them to go right now, then there'll be a crossover point somewhere in the early to mid 2020s, where as a basin we're spending more on abandoning infrastructure than we are developing it. We think that small pools are a big part of pushing up that future development spend and delaying the decommissioning spend. Another way of looking at it is to look at our infrastructure hubs in the UK. So the red line on the chart on the right shows our view of around about 100, 110 what we call infrastructure hubs. So that would be a platform or a floater or a big manifold where more than one field ties into it. Right now, 50% of those hubs, in our view, have an economic life ahead of them of 5 years or longer. But if we fast forward to 2025, we can see a situation where we're down to about 10%, so that's 10, 15 of these infrastructure hubs still having a decent economic life ahead of them. So what we know is that the days of adding new infrastructure to the UK North Sea are not quite over, but it's more and more rare that we see new infrastructure added. So the imperative to maximise existing infrastructure is all the more urgent. And that's another place where we think small pools has got a great place in the UKCS. This is a visual way of representing, I guess, the headlines of our study. 3 billion barrels, just over 3 billion barrels in small pools across just under 300 individual discoveries. In our study, what we did is we placed a few filters on them. So we considered anything that was within 25 kilometres of infrastructure that had a good economic life ahead of it, by which we meant anything over 2022, just to consider today. And we also matched it with hydrocarbon type, so an oil discovery could only tie back to infrastructure that had oil producing through it. That filtered out a few of the discoveries, so we were left with 2.5 billion barrels in small pools to consider. And what we did is we looked at the economics of each of those individual discoveries. So we used $50 a barrel to look at price, because we think that that's where companies are screening projects at right now. And we had a whole different range of cost inputs. I won't go into the methodology, but I'm happy to discuss it afterwards if it's of interest. But using those cost inputs and that price input, we came up with some economic analysis that showed that about 1.5 billion barrels of those 2.5 billion barrels is potentially economic at $50 a barrel in today's costs. When we added in the impact of the tieback of the future, which we'll hear loads more about today, that showed that the additional impact of that technology and that new approach has the potential to unlock a further 400 million barrels. And we'll go into a bit more detail about the value associated with that in a bit later. And because the 30th round was just closing as we were doing that study, we thought it'd be quite interesting to have a look at what value was associated in the 30th round. Quite a lot of resource there, but what we found is that actually the resource that was offered in the 30th round was perhaps some of the more difficult discoveries, so smaller or HPHT discoveries, things like that. So that's the stuff that had been, a lot of that was discoveries from decades ago. But new licensees, new approach, a bit more momentum around it. And we also in our study, which I don't have time to go into the detail today, but we had a look at who's set to gain from the development of these small pools. So the companies that are either the licensees of the small pools themselves, or the license holders, the operators of the hubs that might be set to gain. And we identified companies all across the value chain, majors to independents, private equity, and so on. And we identified 37 hubs that could set to benefit from the development of small pools. So a couple of slides now looking at the detail of our economic analysis. Each of the little dots that you see on these charts represents a small pool. And what we're showing here is a cost curve, really. It's where these discoveries sit in terms of their economics in our view. So you can see that many individual discoveries make up that 1.5 billion barrels that's potentially economic. That's on the left-hand side. And on the right-hand side, what I think is quite interesting is to see the difference in picture when you consider how things look at $65 per barrel. And interestingly, $65 a barrel is what we at Woodmac consider to be a relatively reflective long-term oil price. It's where deals are getting done at today. So, never mind taking a new approach or taking a different view on costs. A $65 oil price automatically, in our view, brings an additional 300 million barrels into a zone where we're looking at economically viable. Of course, good economics on a standalone basis don't guarantee a project sanction. There are lots more complicated factors, corporate priorities, technical feasibility, and so on. But I think what we are aiming to do with our study is to show that actually some of these discoveries, they look okay when it comes to the economic view of them. This is where we show the impact of tieback of the future. So I'll let Graham and his team go into a bit more in terms of what that actually means. But by a new approach and that new technology, accelerating time to first oil or gas, and by reducing development capex and abandonment capex, what we found is that the break-even shifts a lot. For a lot of these individual discoveries, it brings them into a zone where actually they can be considered economic. And you can see that, on the right-hand side where, on a typical case, you have a small discovery, say 15 million barrels, under today's costs and prices, it's just not floating on an economic sense. By introducing the new approach of tieback of the future, then it comes into that economic zone. And what I'd like to finish on today, I guess, is another way to look at the opportunity in small pools, which is, and for me, this is probably one of the more exciting elements of it. It's the idea that because of the maturity of the UK sector, because of the supply chain that we have here, the world-class supply chain, we're at the forefront of developing this new approach and these new technologies. There's a huge potential to export expertise, approaches, equipment, services to the rest of the world. And what we've done is we've looked across the WoodMac database and looked for other small pools around the world. I've limited it to shelf discoveries because I think when we go into deep water, we're in a whole different ballgame. But on top of what's here in the UK, we can see another 25 billion barrels of oil equivalent in small pools. When you look at where those discoveries are, it's Asia Pacific, it's Gulf of Mexico, it's China, Mexico. These are all relatively familiar, I guess, provinces and where business is already done from Aberdeen. To me, the size of the prize in the UK is exciting. This is another level. If I can just sum up, I guess what we see is opportunity in small pools in a few different ways. We see it as an opportunity to bring much needed investment into the UKCS in the near term. We see it as an opportunity to extend the life of existing infrastructure, delay the decommissioning process. And we see it as an opportunity to export skills, approach, services from the UK with us leading here. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much, Barry. That's fascinating. I think what we've heard here, the challenge is great. The small pools are distributed, geographically separate. The value chain that's available, if we get the technology right, the export potential, absolutely amazing. And we hadn't really thought about it in that context before. We haven't had anyone take a commercial view like would Mackenzie have. So fantastic story there. I think Steve's story about pork on the seabed is very different, very interesting and engaging. And I think the Subsea vision for Vision 2030 is also something to get engaged with. So thank you very much to the first two speakers.